to a cobbler to get him some shoes. I'm thinking, how old was this guy? But anyway, I don't know of any cobblers anymore. There's shoe factories for that now. Anyhow, young Ronald Reagan went with his aunt, and the cobbler asked, "Do you want square toes or round?" Well, he couldn't make up his mind. And all the other details, the size, the way the foot fit, whatever, was all taken care of except for square toes or round. And he couldn't make up his mind. So the cobbler's like, "That's okay. When I actually get ready to start on it, I'll call and we'll find out what you're wanting." Well, they left, and a few days later, the cobbler met him in town. Just happened to see him and asked, "Do you want round toes or square?" He couldn't make up his mind. He goes, "That's okay. I'll have them done in a couple of days. You can come pick them up." So it was time to go pick up his shoes, and what he got was one round, one square. And the cobbler told him, "Don't ever let anybody make your decisions for you." And that was something that it stuck with him. Let's bow our heads. Dear Father in heaven, Lord, as we deal with life and all that goes on in our lives, we look to you to guide us. So often things seem out of our control, but we still have to decide. So we look to you for the guidance. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, how do we make choices? I'm sure there's books written on it, although I didn't find anything this week, on how to make a choice. I'll give you a recipe that my brother uses. You gather information, just everything you find out about whatever you got to decide on. You weigh all the options, just everything. It's information overload almost. Then you get everybody's opinion. Then you repeat. Then you repeat. And you repeat. That's the way my brother seems to do it sometimes. I'll pick on him since he's not here to beat me up. There's a lot of good in that, other than the repeat. That's more along procrastination or something. That's a whole nother topic. But do you ever feel like most of your choices are made for you? I know kids probably feel that more than we adults, or maybe not. Do you feel like your choices are made without you knowing? I've come across this sometimes. You don't realize you made a choice till after you're experiencing the consequences of that choice. Sometimes that happens to us. One of the things we can do, well, I've got a list of a few things we can do to help in the decision process. First off, when we're aware that there's a choice to be made, we have to be aware of it. In general, we need to be aware of what's going on and what's expected of us. Then we can also ask God to guide our decisions. We should put this early in the process, like as soon as we know that we're up against something, so that we don't make a lot of detours. The Bible and the law of God are excellent guides. If you can find a similar situation in here, use it. Also, the law of God, one way of looking at it, it was written out for us for all those instances where you're really not sure just how this should be. If you follow the law of God, you won't have anything blatantly wrong or evil. if you're following the law of God, to the best of our ability, then we can trust that God's got us under control. Now, deciding between blue or red today, oh, I'm sorry, it's green. I don't see that as a evil or good or righteous decision, but I see there's some green being worn, and I was reminded this morning. So I obviously didn't just because I was reminded. But that's what the law of God is for. It's to help us as we go through life. Here's some standards to go by. We'll work with the minute details later. We also need to slow down. Have you ever noticed that a lot of the deals out there, you've got to decide on it right now because tomorrow it's not going to be here? Not so fast, especially if it costs a certain amount of money. That's up to you what your threshold of pain is. Or, if it's going to alter your life in some way, slow down. Gather information, get advice, talk to God. Another one, I alluded to it earlier, was gather information. And this is, with the way the internet works now, man, you can Google anything and get more facts on it and more opinions on it than you could ever have figured out before. Another one is to watch out for principles, not just opportunities. A lot of times opportunities come up, but we don't see the principle of what's being asked of us or what's being expected from us. We need to have our own principles, and things that are outside of that, I'll pass. A lot of your scams feed on greed or, selfishness, our desire to look better than the neighbors. A lot of that is played on. So if we have our own standards, then some of these scams won't affect us. My dad once told me to never buy a car after sundown. If it's not bright enough to see it, you don't need to buy it. It can wait. I'm wondering if there's a story behind that. And then sometimes we need to choose ahead of time. What would I do in this situation? It's why we have fire drills. If the place is on fire, that's not the time to be gathering information, thinking about it, getting people's opinion. So we need to choose ahead of time. What would we do in certain situations? We also need to make sure that everyday choices are not in conflict with our life goals. This also means that we need to have life goals. Have you ever heard the adage, not deciding is deciding? So often there's what would you call it, a default? If you don't decide, this will happen. Or if you don't decide, somebody's going to decide for you. In spiritual matters, Satan's course is the default. So we have to consciously choose the right, otherwise the wrong will take over. We should make a decision and stay with it. Perseverance, I think, matters more than always getting the choice right. Again, something from my dad. He always told me to give a job 2 years to figure out whether or not that's what you want to do or that's where you want to stay. It's kind of like going through life in rush hour traffic. I irritate my wife in that I like to dodge in and out trying to find the best lane, and you always pick like the McDonald's semi, something big that you can see, and you gauge your progress by if you're catching up with him or if you're staying ahead of him or if they're going on. But we can't go through life always dodging in and out, changing our mind and changing our direction. It doesn't necessarily get us anywhere. Let's look at some Bible examples of good and or bad choices. Adam. Let's turn to Genesis 3:6. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and the tree desirable to make one wise, she took its fruit and she ate. She also gave some to her husband with her, and he ate. And then we go to verse 12. Then the man said, the woman whom you gave to me, the woman you gave to be with me, she gave me of the tree, and I ate. It's alluded to, but it doesn't say that Adam chose to eat the fruit. But somewhere in there, Eve brought him the fruit. I think he knew what it was, but he chose her over God. And then he blamed God for giving her to him, to trick him like this. So sometimes there's a lot of issues there, but one thing we need to be able to do is, I chose, it was my choice, I'll stand behind it, and I'll take whatever consequences come. We can't always blame everybody for our choices. Then there's the people before the flood. When Noah was preaching to them, and he's building this ark, and it's taken a long time, I tend to think there were a lot of people, maybe not most people, but maybe the ark could have been bigger. But, you know, the people, they thought it was from God, and, well, then it started taking too long. You know, if the flood was going to be coming in 3 weeks, I'm with you. But after 79 years, I don't know if this is going to happen. You know, everybody's against it. You know, it just, I don't know. They lost out because what they decided didn't happen to them soon enough, and they changed their mind. Then we can look at Lot. Genesis 13. Let me find it. Genesis 13, I'll be reading 6 to 11. Then, okay. Now the land was not able to support them. This is when Abraham had left Egypt and gone back to Canaan, that they might dwell together, for their possessions were so great that they could not dwell together. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abraham's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. The Canaanites and the Perizzites then dwelt in the land. So Abram said to Lot, please, let there be no strife between you and me, and between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brethren. Is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If you take the left, then I will go to the right. Or if you go to the right, I will go to the left. And Lot lifted up his eyes and saw that the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt as you go toward Zoar. Then Lot chose for himself all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated from each other. Okay. So Abraham put to him a choice. Hey, to keep the peace between us, you go one way, I'll go the other. And it's up to you which way you want to go. Lot was aware that the promise that the land was given to Abraham. But, hey, Abraham's offering, that looks pretty good. So he went down to the plain of Jordan, which is where Sodom and Gomorrah and those cities were. Then we find a few years later in his life, he's fleeing from the city with the 2 daughters that were too young to have a choice, and his wife, which he lost anyway, because he chose a wicked city to live in. Sometimes our choices have consequences that aren't always apparent when we're making the choices. Dazzled with visions of worldly gain, Lot overlooked the moral and spiritual evils that would be encountered there. The inhabitants of the plain were sinners before the Lord exceedingly. But of this he was ignorant, or not knowing gave it but little weight. He chose him all the plain of the Jordan and pitched his tent toward Sodom. How little did he foresee the terrible results of that selfish choice. Then we have Joseph. Everything was good for Joseph when he was a kid. He was daddy's favorite. He was even having dreams about how he was going to be better